When a wife discovers her husband's affair with his secretary, her world crumbles. But a DNA test revealed a devastating secret that no one could have imagined. A story of deceit, shocking revelations, and the search for truth that will forever change the destiny of everyone involved. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that will stir your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you're watching this surprising video from. 20 years. 20 years dedicated to a marriage that I believed was perfect. Throughout that time, I was the exemplary wife, the competent executive, the woman who managed to balance career and family with a mastery that made my friends envious. At social events, Richard and I were the couple everyone admired. He with his impeccably tailored suit, graying hair at the temples that gave him a distinguished air, and that smile that charmed everyone. I, always elegant, with my discreet but valuable jewelry, my hair perfectly styled even after a full day of stressful meetings. "How do you do it?" they would ask, and I would smile, holding Richard's arm. "Communication," I would answer. "We never go to bed angry with each other." If you had asked me 2 years ago if I was happy, I would have answered without hesitation that yes. How wrong I was. It was on a Wednesday in autumn that my life fell apart. I remember the cloudy sky, the dry leaves being swept by the wind on the sidewalk of our luxury apartment complex. The smell of imminent rain hung in the air. I should have been in New York City, closing an important deal, but the meeting ended earlier than expected. The client accepted our proposal without the changes I had anticipated having to negotiate hard for. A quick and unexpected victory. In the cab back to the airport, I had an idea. I thought about surprising Richard. 20 years of marriage, and I still had these romantic notions. The doorman smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. Mr. Richard didn't mention you would be back today." Of course he didn't mention it. He didn't know. That was the point of the surprise. The private elevator took us directly to our penthouse apartment, a privilege for which we paid an extra fee to the building, but which Richard insisted was worth every penny. "Privacy is priceless, Eleanor," he used to say. Now I would understand the true value of that privacy for him. When the doors opened, I noticed something strange in the air. A perfume. It wasn't mine, certainly. It was too sweet, almost sickening. Cheap. The kind of fragrance I would never buy. Something you would buy at a drugstore, not at a fine perfumery. For a moment, I thought maybe the housekeeper had brought a friend, although that was against our rules. But it was Wednesday, and Mrs. Betty only came on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. A thought crossed my mind, but I immediately dismissed it. No, Richard would never do that. I placed my Italian leather briefcase on the floor, silently. My Louboutin? Heels made no noise on the Persian rug that decorated our foyer. That rug, I remember well, had been bought during our trip to Morocco to celebrate 10 years of marriage. Richard teased the seller for hours, haggling as if we were in financial difficulties, just for the pleasure of closing a good deal. In the end, we paid an amount that was insignificant to us, but which would probably support the seller's family for months. It was then that I heard the laughter. One was Richard's, unmistakable after so many years. That deep, slightly hoarse laugh that always made me smile. The other, feminine, young, unknown, or maybe not so unknown after all. I followed, the sounds as if in a trance. The hallway leading to our bedroom had never seemed so long. On the walls, photographs of us. Our honeymoon in Venice. The safari in Africa we took when we completed 5 years together. The trip to Japan to celebrate my promotion to CEO. Memories of a life I believed to be real, but which now seemed like an elaborate illusion. And there they were, in our bed, on the Egyptian silk sheets that I had brought from my last trip to Dubai. Richard had called in the middle of the trip. "Bring those blue sheets, honey. You know how I like the feel of silk against my skin." Yes, now I knew exactly why. Ashley, my secretary, 25 years old, blonde hair, a sculpted body that she made a point of showing off with clothes that were too tight for the corporate environment. I had hired her against my intuition, at Richard's insistence. "She has an excellent resume, honey. We need to give opportunities to young talent." Young talent. Now I understood what kind of talent he had identified. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. Something inside me, perhaps the same instinct that made me reach the position of CEO of a multinational corporation, told me to step back, observe, plan, act at the right moment. The emotional Eleanor wanted to burst into the room, scream, tear every blonde hair from that young head, throw Richard's clothes out the window like in the cliché scenes from movies. But the executive Eleanor, the strategist, knew that would only put me at a disadvantage. And that's what I did. I went back to the elevator, went down, and went to a hotel, the Hyatt, where we always stayed when we renovated the apartment. The receptionist recognized me. "Mrs. Eleanor, what a surprise. We don't have a reservation for you today." I forced a smile. "Last-minute decision, Charles. Do you have a suite available?" Of course they did. They always did, for clients like us. That night, as I stared at the ceiling of the impersonal room, I felt as if an abyss had opened beneath my feet. 20 years wasted. For a moment, I thought about all the trips canceled because he needed to work, the dinners where he answered urgent office calls, the nights he came home late smelling of perfume, but I believed him when he said it was just the smell of the cab, the conferences where he insisted that Ashley accompany him to take notes. How many others had there been before her? How many other secretaries, assistants, interns? Would this be the first case, or just the first one I discovered? How could I have been so blind? The successful executive, known for her business acumen, couldn't see the betrayal happening right under her nose. The irony was palpable. I could almost hear the laughter of the other executives' wives. She can identify a company on the verge of bankruptcy to buy for pennies, but she didn't see that her husband was cheating on her with his secretary. The cliché humiliated me, even more. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. I cried for the lost time, for the betrayed trust, for the future I had imagined, and that was now disintegrating like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. I cried for the naive woman I had been, for the fool who believed the flimsy excuses, the obvious pretexts. Then, I dried my face and began to think like the businesswoman I had always been. Strategy, evidence, outcome. I returned home the next morning as if nothing had happened. Richard was in the kitchen, having coffee, reading the newspaper as usual. He was wearing the silk robe I gave him on his last birthday. He looked up when I entered, surprised. For a moment, I saw panic cross his eyes, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Eleanor, why didn't you let me know you were coming back today? I would have picked you up at the airport." He kissed me on the forehead, casually, as if he hadn't been between another woman's legs the night before. His mint breath couldn't completely disguise the smell of whiskey. He always drank whiskey after sex. Another detail that now made sense. It was a last-minute decision, I replied, pouring myself some coffee. My hands were shaking slightly, but he didn't notice. He never noticed those details. The meeting ended earlier than expected. I decided to spend the night at the Hyatt so I wouldn't bother you coming home late. "You never bother me, honey." His tone was so convincing that for a moment I almost believed him. "And how was the meeting?" he asked, returning to the newspaper. "It was productive," I replied. "We closed the deal." And so began the charade. For 3 months, I kept up appearances. I smiled at business dinners, wearing my favorite Cartier watch, while inside I calculated every step of my plan. That watch, ironically, had been a gift from Richard on our wedding anniversary last year. "For the woman who always knows the value of time," he said as he handed me the characteristic red box. I wondered now how much of my valuable time he had wasted with his lies. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and efficient man who was recommended to me by my lawyer, Michelle, the only person I trusted enough to share my situation with. "Don't do anything rash," she advised me, her experienced eyes analyzing me over her Italian-framed glasses. "Gather evidence. Document everything. You need to be prepared if he contests the division of assets. Assets. An entire life reduced to assets and liabilities to be divided, like a company being liquidated." Wednesdays became a torturous ritual. That's when Richard said he had late meetings, and I pretended to believe him. On some of those nights, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried silently, the sound of the shower muffling my sobs. On others, I sat in the home office, drinking a glass of red wine while examining the latest photos sent by the investigator. The investigator sent me photos, them at the restaurant we used to frequent, them entering motels, them walking hand in hand in a mall far from our house, as if they were a normal couple. The last category was the one that hurt me the most. It wasn't just sex, I realized. There was an everyday intimacy that Richard and I hadn't shared for years. When was the last time we walked hand in hand in a mall? When was the last time we laughed uncontrollably together, like they did in the photos? Our encounters had become functional, practical, like business meetings with predefined agendas. Efficient, no surprises sex on Tuesday and Friday nights. Sunday brunch with selected friends. Theater once a month. A meticulously organized life that now revealed itself to be empty. I began to notice the expensive gifts Richard gave her. Bags, jewelry, things that I now realized were bought with money that I also helped earn. In one of the photos, she was wearing a diamond necklace identical to the one he had given me on our 15th anniversary. One of a kind, he had said. Designed especially for you. Another lie. During this time, I had to deal with the launch of a new product line at the company. Sleepless nights, pressure from shareholders, fierce competition. My world collapsing at home, and me having to maintain composure at board meetings. "Eleanor is radiant today," commented one of the directors after a particularly successful presentation. Little did he know that I had taken an anti-anxiety pill and drunk 2 cups of strong coffee to function that day, after a whole night of crying. I developed insomnia. Deep, dark circles under my eyes that even the best concealer couldn't completely hide. I lost 10 pounds, a weight loss that my colleagues envied, unaware that it was the result of the anguish that prevented me from swallowing anything beyond the bare minimum to survive. "What's your diet, Eleanor? You look great." The irony of life. I never received as many compliments as during this period when I felt shattered inside. I began to question all my choices. Who was I besides Richard's wife? Besides the CEO of the company? I had built my identity around these 2 roles, and now one of them was revealed to be a sham. In the darkest moments, I even questioned my professional competence. If I was so easily deceived in my personal life, would I really be as astute in business as I believed? After 3 months of accumulating evidence, I chose a Wednesday for the confrontation. I prepared everything meticulously. I canceled all my meetings, something I rarely did. "Is Mrs. Eleanor all right?" asked my new secretary, hired after Ashley started mysteriously missing work, probably on her dates with Richard. "I'm fine, Denise. I just need to take care of some personal matters." I dismissed the housekeeper, making up a story about a surprise. I was preparing for Richard. Mrs. Betty smiled, complicit. "I understand, Mrs. Eleanor. Mr. Richard will be very happy." The naivety of the woman, who had worked with us for 15 years, almost made me feel sorry for her. She really believed we were the perfect couple we pretended to be. I placed the photos in a folder on our imported Italian mahogany dining table. I remembered when we bought that table, during a trip to Milan. Richard insisted it was an investment in the future. "Imagine how many wonderful dinners we'll have here, Eleanor. Our children and grandchildren will one day gather around this table." The children never came. There was always a reason to postpone. I needed to establish myself in my career. Then, he was involved in an important case. Then, I was promoted to CEO and needed to prove my worth. When we finally decided to try, my body refused to cooperate. Fertility treatments that didn't work. Doctors who suggested that maybe it was the stress. Adoption that was considered and then discarded because we wouldn't have time to give the necessary attention to a child with special needs. And now, this table that should have witnessed the evolution of a family would serve for the final collapse of what remained of it. When Richard arrived, later than usual, I was sitting at the table. No makeup, no jewelry. Just me, stripped of artifice with the raw reality before me. My hair, normally impeccably styled, was tied up in a messy bun. I was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, clothes I only wore when I was sick. In a way, I was sick with betrayal. with lies, with disillusionment. "We need to talk," I said, with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed. He tried to hide his nervousness. He placed his leather briefcase on the floor, loosened his tie. Gestures I knew so well after 2 decades together. "Of course, honey. Any problem at the company?" "No. The problem is here." I pushed the folder towards him. When he opened it and saw the photos, his face paled. The first showed Ashley and him entering a motel downtown. The second, them having a candlelit dinner at our favorite restaurant. The third, the most painful, them kissing on a park bench, like teenagers in love. I expected screams, denials, elaborate excuses. Denial is always the first stage, Michelle had told me, who had gone through something similar years ago. He'll say the photos were manipulated, that it's not what it looks like, that you're crazy. I had prepared responses for each of these possibilities, but what I received was an immediate confession. "Forgive me," he said with tears in his eyes, tears that seemed genuine. It was a moment of weakness that turned into an obsession. "It doesn't mean anything. You're the woman of my life." At that moment, something seemed wrong. The confession too quick, the apologies too ready. Like a negotiation where the other party concedes too easily, it set off an alarm in my mind trained to detect flaws. "Call her," I ordered. "Now. End it all in front of me." He hesitated, but picked up his cell phone. His hand was shaking slightly. I could see her name on the screen. Ashley Work. So predictable. He put it on speakerphone. Her voice answered, cheerful. "Hi, honey." That word, honey, was like a knife. It wasn't just sex. There was affection, intimacy. The photos didn't lie. "Ashley," he began. His voice was tense, almost unrecognizable. "We can't see each other anymore. My wife. She found out everything." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then came the explosion, not of anger, but of crying. A desperate cry that seemed to come from the depths. "You can't do this to me," she sobbed. Not with the baby." That word, baby, echoed through the elegantly decorated apartment with pieces of Brazilian contemporary art. Expensive paintings that we had acquired together at charity auctions. Investment and philanthropy at the same time, Richard used to say. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room, as if the walls were closing in on me. "What baby?" I asked, my voice bordering on hysteria for the first time. Richard hung up the phone abruptly. "I was going to tell you," he stammered. "I swear I was going to tell you." That night, I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to absorb that my husband was not only cheating on me, but was going to have a child with another woman, with my secretary. At some point in the dawn, I got up and vomited violently. My body physically rejected the truth that my mind was still trying to process. The humiliation was unbearable. Even worse would be when the news spread. Our community is small. The city's elite frequent the same places, the same charity events, the same exclusive clubs. The gossip had already started to circulate. Ashley had begun to show a small belly, something that wouldn't go unnoticed for long. At the country club, where I am a board member, the looks of the other women alternated between pity and poorly disguised satisfaction. They had always envied my seemingly perfect life, the successful husband, the brilliant career, the international trips, the designer clothes. Now they had something to talk about during their afternoon teas. "Did you hear about Eleanor? Her husband cheated on her with his secretary, and the girl is pregnant." What a cliché, right? A cliché. That's what my life had become. One of those afternoons at the club, while I was swimming in the Olympic-sized pool trying to tire my body enough to get a few hours of sleep, I overheard 2 women talking without realizing my presence. They say he's been with her for over a year, and poor Eleanor didn't suspect a thing. Poor thing? She was too busy with her career to take care of her husband. "If you don't water your garden, honey, someone else will water it for you." I emerged from the water right in front of them, their faces flushed with embarrassment when they saw me. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said with an icy smile. "Lovely day for gossip, isn't it?" I left the pool with what dignity I could muster. But as soon as I entered the locker room, I broke down in tears. I started the divorce process. Richard begged me to try again, said he would fire Ashley, that he would never see her again. It was a mistake, Eleanor. A terrible mistake. We can overcome this together. And the baby? I asked. Are you going to fire him too? He had no answer for that, nor did I expect him to. But how can you trust someone who has led a double life for months? Years, perhaps. Over the next 6 months, I threw myself into work like never before. We launched the new product line, which was a success beyond expectations. Externally, I seemed unshakable. The successful businesswoman who overcame a scandalous divorce and still increased the company's profits by 30%. I was on the cover of the leading business magazine, Eleanor Bennett, How to Turn Personal Crisis into Business Success. The irony did not escape me. The article talked about resilience and the ability to separate the personal from the professional, as if my life were being used as a motivational case study. Internally, I was in pieces. Small rituals became impossible. I couldn't hear our song without crying. I couldn't pass by the restaurants we frequented without feeling nauseous. Even watching certain movies, the ones we saw together, that we quoted to each other as private jokes, became too painful. That's when I received an anonymous call. A female voice, which I didn't recognize. Mrs. Eleanor, not everything is as it seems. Before you finalize your divorce, you should investigate further. Ask for a DNA test. Who is this? I demanded to know. Someone who knows the truth about Ashley and your husband. The call ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. DNA test? For what? The paternity seemed obvious, but that voice ignited a curiosity that kept me awake. I began to investigate Ashley's past. The investigator I had hired earlier traced her origins to an orphanage upstate. Coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, in the same small town where Richard spent his childhood summers on his grandparents' farm. This is really interesting, commented the investigator when he handed me the report. Miss Ashley was left at the orphanage when she was just a few days old. No identification of the mother. The only document was a birth certificate with the name she carries to this day. I began to piece things together. The dates matched perfectly. Richard was 18 when he last visited the town before going to college. Ashley was born 9 months later. Could it be possible? The idea was so absurd that I hesitated to consider it. The secrets of Richard's family had always been carefully guarded. His father, a renowned judge, was known for his public moral rigidity, although rumors about his extramarital affairs were abundant in social circles. Like the saying goes, the shoemaker's son always goes barefoot. But the more I investigated, the more sense it made. The way Richard hired her quickly, ignoring more qualified candidates. The too easy confession, as if he was relieved to be discovered. The desperation to finalize the divorce process before the child's birth. 9 months after discovering the affair, we were at a divorce hearing when I requested a DNA test for the newborn baby. Richard turned livid. "This is absurd," he protested. An invasion of privacy. His exaggerated reaction only confirmed my suspicions. The judge, an old friend of Richard's father, seemed inclined to deny my request. But my lawyer was relentless. "Your Honor, the test is fundamental to determine alimony and inheritance issues. If the defendant has nothing to hide, he shouldn't object." The judge, reluctantly, ordered the test. 2 weeks later, we had the results. When I opened the envelope, my hands were shaking. Richard was not the child's father, but there was something else. Something the lab classified as a statistical anomaly. There was a strong probability of kinship between Richard and Ashley. Not as father and daughter, as I had suspected, but as siblings. Siblings. The word hit me like a punch. I confronted Richard with the results in our apartment, already partially emptied for the sale that was part of the divorce settlement. The bare walls, the empty spaces left by furniture that had already been removed, created a ghostly atmosphere suitable for the surreal conversation we were about to have. He broke down. Between sobs, he confessed that his parents had had a daughter, out of wedlock, the result of his father's affair with a maid on their farm. The girl, only 16 years old, was sent away as soon as the pregnancy was discovered. The child was sent to an orphanage with a generous donation to keep the matter secret. He had always known about this sister's existence, but had never looked for her. The family agreement was never to mention that shame. My father said it was for the best for everyone, that she would have a better life away from us, that she would be adopted by a good family. His voice was choked. I believed it for years. Or maybe I just chose to believe it because it was more convenient. Ashley, investigating her origins through the orphanage records, discovered the truth. But instead of contacting the family directly, she planned an elaborate revenge. She got the job as secretary to get close to the brother who never acknowledged her, and then faked an affair to destroy his marriage. The real father of the baby? Richard's cousin, with whom Ashley became involved while carrying out her plan. Michael? I asked, incredulous. Michael, Richard's party-loving cousin, who always made inappropriate jokes at Sunday lunches and flirted shamelessly with all the women present, including me. Does he know he's the father? He knows, and he's terrified. You know Michael, he never wanted responsibilities. When I confronted Ashley, she initially denied it. I invited her for coffee in a neutral place, away from prying eyes. She arrived defensive, the small belly now more apparent under her loose dress. Why did you call me here? She asked, her tone hostile. I pushed the test results across the table. She looked at them, confused at first, then with growing understanding. Her pale face told me everything I needed to know. I'm not going. To call the police, I said calmly. Not for you, but for Richard, and for the innocent baby in this whole story. But I want the truth. Now. Faced with the evidence, she finally confessed. They abandoned me like I was trash, she said bitterly. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. I grew up without a family while you all had everything. I thought he knew who I was when he hired me. I thought he had finally recognized me as his sister, but he didn't even suspect it. So I decided to make him lose what he valued most. You. There was never an affair? I asked, still trying to process everything. Of course not. The indignation in her voice seemed genuine. He's my brother. We just acted. The photos your investigator took. We carefully chose the locations, knowing he would follow us. We went into the motel, but we left through the back door after paying for a few hours. The kisses were just for the cameras, always in places where we knew we would be seen. And the baby? Her gaze lowered. Michael happened. For real. It wasn't in the plan. He showed up on the night I was celebrating another successful step in the plan. We drank too much. One thing led to another. When I found out I was pregnant, it was too late to go back. So I adapted the plan. The pregnancy would be the final blow. That bombshell revelation left me stunned. What seemed like a banal case of infidelity turned out to be an intricate plot of family revenge. I left that coffee shop trying to process everything. The city streets seemed strange, as if I were in an unfamiliar place. People walked, talked, lived their normal lives while my world had been completely turned upside down. The shock of the discovery filled every corner of that apartment where I had lived for 2 decades of a life that now seemed like a complete lie. On the loneliest nights, I would sit on the balcony with a glass of wine, looking at the city lights and trying to understand how we had reached this point. So many secrets, so many lies, so much damage passed down from generation to generation. In those moments of contemplation, I found a strange peace in knowing that Richard had never actually cheated on me. As bizarre as the situation was, that small detail helped me sleep at night. 2 decades of marriage hadn't been completely a lie, just partially. When everything seemed to finally calm down, I found messages on Richard's computer. I was organizing some files for the real estate transaction of our apartment when I opened a seemingly harmless folder titled Personal Documents. Among contracts and tax receipts, I found a subfolder called A. Inside, dozens of emails exchanged between him and Ashley over the past 2 years. Messages that revealed he knew the truth from the beginning. He had recognized Ashley the moment she applied for the job. Her photo on her resume immediately reminded him of the maid his father had gotten pregnant. The same eyes, the same face shape. He had discreetly investigated and confirmed his suspicions, but he hadn't had the courage to tell anyone the truth, not even me. The entire affair was staged for me to discover, as he didn't have the courage to reveal his family history directly. "You would never forgive me for hiding something like this for so many years," he said in one of the emails. "It's better for you to hate me for something I didn't do than for the omission I actually committed." A distorted logic, but one that somehow made sense within the universe of secrets in which he had been raised. Preserving appearances at all costs was the Bennett family mantra. Devastated by this new layer of lies, I decided I needed space to process everything. I retreated to our country house, the one Richard rarely visited because he found it too isolated. Surrounded by vineyards that had always been my refuge, away from prying eyes and incessant whispers, I found some peace. The aroma of ripe grapes and the sound of birds helped me find some peace amidst the emotional chaos. I spent days walking among the vines, observing the work of the employees, rediscovering the pleasure of small things. The sunrise over the mountains, the taste of freshly brewed coffee, the wine produced from the estate's grapes, bottled 5 years ago and now perfectly aged. During this period of isolation, I discovered more details about the whole story. Michael, Richard's cousin, reached out to me. He was nervous, disheveled, far from the image of the carefree playboy he had always cultivated. "I need you to know that I didn't know anything," he said, sitting uncomfortably on the porch of the country house. "About her being, you know, Richard's sister," I finished. "Yes, that." He swallowed hard. "I met Ashley at a party. I thought she was amazing, one of the most interesting women I'd ever met. Only later, when she told me about the plan, I was shocked. But the baby was already on the way." His eyes filled with tears, something I never imagined seeing in that always sarcastic face. "I'm going to take responsibility, Eleanor. I'm not the jerk everyone thinks I am." In those conversations, I discovered that Ashley had also been manipulated. She truly believed she was carrying out a revenge plan against the brother who never looked for her, unaware that he had orchestrated everything so that the truth would come out without him having to take responsibility for it. "Typical of Richard," I commented bitterly. "Always letting others do the dirty work for him." Michael nodded. "He's always been like that. Since childhood. Remember that time we broke Aunt Beatrice's Chinese vase? He convinced me to take the blame alone, promising he would share the money he got for his birthday with me. I never received a penny. 15 months after the initial discovery, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I organized a dinner bringing together everyone involved. Richard, Ashley, Michael, and the baby, now almost a year old. I hired a catering team to serve in the garden of the country house, as the neutral environment seemed more suitable for what I had in mind. Around the table I had placed under the olive trees I planted when we bought the property and that were now strong and leafy. I proposed a fresh start based on the truth, however painful it might be. "We've lived decades of lies," I said, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. "All well-intentioned, all destructive. We can't change the past, but we can decide what the future will be like." Richard seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of the secrets he had carried for so long had compressed his physical presence. Ashley was visibly nervous, constantly adjusting the simple dress she wore. Michael held the baby with a genuine affection he had never shown for anything before. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Richard, his voice cautious. "Transparency. Acceptance. A new kind of family." I looked at the baby. A chubby boy with Ashley's eyes and the Bennett's stubborn chin. That child deserves to grow up knowing his true story, not shrouded in secrets and shame like Ashley's case was. I didn't go back to Richard. Our marriage was irreparably broken, not by the affair that never really existed, but by the lies that sustained our relationship. Trust, once lost, is like a shattered crystal vase. You can glue the pieces together, but the cracks will always remain visible. However, we built a relationship of respect. He finally publicly acknowledged Ashley as his sister, facing his father's wrath and society's shock. The scandal was inevitable, but we faced it together, each in our own way. Richard resigned as president of the law firm and decided to dedicate himself to pro bono cases, especially cases involving abandoned children. A form of redemption, perhaps, or just the belated recognition that some things are more important than appearances and social status. I developed an unexpected friendship with Ashley. The woman I hated for destroying my marriage became an ally. She was talented, determined, characteristics I recognized in myself. After long conversations, I decided that talent shouldn't be wasted because of the past. I kept her at the company, but in another department, where her potential blossomed without the constant shadow of our complicated history. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked me one day, confused by my generosity. "I'm not doing it for you," I replied honestly. "I'm doing it for the woman I want to be, someone who doesn't let herself be consumed by bitterness or resentment." The baby, Matthew, became part of my life, not as the symbol of betrayal, but as an opportunity to build new kinds of family bonds. He called me aunt, and I discovered a tenderness I didn't know I possessed. On the weekends he spent with me. At the country house, I would take him to see the vineyards, teach him to distinguish the different types of grapes, tell him stories about the olive trees. "These trees are older than you," I would say, as he looked in wonder at the twisted branches, "but younger than me. Aunt Eleanor is old," he would conclude, with the implacable logic of small children, making me laugh. At Matthew's second birthday party, held in the garden of the house where I now live alone, everyone was present. Richard and his new girlfriend, a university professor who seemed to genuinely like him for who he was, not for the status he represented. Ashley and Michael, who now formed a surprisingly functional couple, him having matured with fatherhood, her having finally found a place of belonging. Friends and family who overcame the initial shock and accepted our peculiar new family configuration. As I watched the sun setting over the mountains surrounding the city, I realized that the truth, however painful, offers a freedom that decades of well-intentioned lies could never provide. There is a lightness in no longer having to keep up appearances, in not having to remember which lies you told to whom. At 47, I rediscovered who I am beyond the roles I played. I am not just Richard's ex-wife or the CEO of the company. I am Eleanor, a woman who went through the fire and emerged stronger, wiser, more complete. People still talk, of course. At charity events, exclusive clubs, expensive restaurants. Some with admiration for how I handled everything. Others with that same malicious satisfaction as always. The looks, the whispers behind fans or champagne glasses, the conversations that stop when I enter a room. I don't care anymore. "How did you manage to forgive?" I am frequently asked. "It's not exactly forgiveness," I explain. "It's acceptance. Acceptance that people are complex, that families have secrets, that love and hate often stem from the same deep roots. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die," I say, quoting a phrase I read somewhere that has become my mantra. I chose not to poison myself. Sometimes, when I'm alone on my porch, enjoying a glass of the wine produced in my own vineyards, I think about how unpredictable life is. If that Wednesday in autumn hadn't existed, I would still be living a comfortable lie. Would that have been better? I can't say. What I do know is that now I live in truth. A truth that we built together. Richard, Ashley, me, everyone involved in this unlikely story. A truth that cost tears and sleepless nights, but that allowed us all to grow. Richard finally took responsibility for his family secrets. He confronted his father, who initially denied everything, but eventually had to give in to the evidence. The old judge, so respected in public, so flawed in private, seemed smaller with each new encounter. The weight of age and lies finally catching up with him. Ashley found the place where she belongs. No longer the abandoned child, no longer the vengeful secretary, but a woman with her own identity, a competent professional, a dedicated mother. She developed a mentoring program for young orphans within the company, transforming her pain into something productive. I discovered an inner strength I didn't even know I possessed. The ability to completely rebuild a life at 45, when many already settle into the familiar. To transform a personal crisis into an opportunity for growth. As for me, I'm ready for the next chapter. Last week, I met someone, a winemaker who came to evaluate my vineyards. 50-something, divorced for a decade, kind eyes and hands calloused from work. We talked about vintages and fermentation techniques, And for the first time in a long time, I felt that thrill of possibilities. He invited me to dinner. I hesitated, the scars of the past still present. "Just dinner," he said, noticing my hesitation. "To talk about how to improve the production of your vineyards." I accepted, on the condition that dinner was at the restaurant of the neighboring winery. Neutral territory. At dinner, we talked little about wine and a lot about books, movies, travel. He has an easy laugh and listens with genuine interest. He didn't try to impress me with stories of achievements or material possessions, as so many men in my age group do. Instead, he talked about his 4-year-old grandson who he's teaching to fish, about the pleasure of waking up early to see the sunrise among the vines. I don't know if it will lead to anything, and that's okay. I've learned that life doesn't need to follow a predetermined script. Sometimes it's in the unexpected detours that we find the most beautiful paths. Right now, I'm filling out papers to adopt a girl. I'm 47 years old, single, CEO of a company, and my family life is, to say the least, unconventional. The social workers raise their eyebrows when I tell my story, but they also see the strength, the resilience, the ability to love despite the scars. The girl is 12 years old. She grew up in an orphanage like Ashley. She has the distrustful eyes and defensive posture of someone who learned too early that the world can be a hostile place. When I asked why I chose a preteen instead of a baby, as most adoption applicants do, I answered with the truth. Because she needs it more, and because I understand what it's like to have to rebuild a life from scratch. In our supervised meetings, she keeps her distance, testing if I'm just another adult who will abandon her. She wears black clothes, has blue-dyed hair, and refuses to smile in photos. I smile for both of us. I know that behind that rebellious facade there is a child longing for love. "I'm going to teach you how to make my grandmother's tomato sauce," I promised at the last meeting. "It's a family secret." "We're not family," she replied, defiant. "Not yet," I agreed. "But we can be if you want." I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, the same glimmer I see in the mirror every morning now. In the last report, the social worker wrote, "The applicant and the minor demonstrate significant progress in their relationship. I recommend the continuation of the adoption process." Small victories. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll get the adoption, if the kind-eyed winemaker will enter my life, if our peculiar extended family will continue to function harmoniously. What I do know is that, for the first time in many years, I am living authentically. The truth can hurt. It can shatter your heart, destroy your certainties, turn your world upside down. But it can also free you. It can make room for new possibilities, new loves, new beginnings. I am 47 years old. Half of my life was built on well-intentioned lies. The other half will be built on difficult but liberating truths. This is my story. A story of betrayal that wasn't betrayal, of a love that wasn't love, of a family that wasn't family, and, paradoxically, of how I discovered the true meaning of all these things when they crumbled around me. As wine producers say, sometimes the grape needs to be crushed to reveal its true potential. I was crushed, yes, but what emerged was something richer, more complex, more authentic than I ever imagined possible. Today, when I look back at that Wednesday in autumn, I no longer feel anger, nor hurt, not even sadness. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that forced me to grow, for the lies that eventually led me to the truth, for the end that became a new beginning. The sun is setting over my vineyards now. Matthew runs through the garden, chasing butterflies, his crystal-clear laughter echoing among the vines. Ashley watches, protective, a smile softening her face once marked by bitterness. Richard is talking to his cousin, both more relaxed with each other than they ever were. And I'm here, watching this unlikely family we built from the ashes of secrets and lies. Life rarely follows the path we plan. Sometimes, it takes us through painful detours, along roads filled with obstacles. But if we have the courage to move forward, to face each curve with honesty and strength, we can discover breathtaking landscapes that we never imagined existed. This is my truth. This is my liberation. This is my new life. And I'm just getting started.